already. Some of you have already tuned in, but hello, Portugal. Hello, hello, buenos dias. So welcome again, welcome back to some of you, welcome for the first time to others. Thanks for tuning in to this third breakfast bite on digital citizenship. I'm Elizabeth, mother of 2 rebel girls and director of Co-Facé Families Europe. And I will co-host this bite with Martin, new dad in lockdown and senior policy and advocacy manager of Co-Facé. And he specializes, amongst other things, in digital affairs.
Yeah, so hi everyone. We can't see or hear you, so that's on purpose. But if you look at the bottom right of your screen, you have the chat feature, which you've already used, many of you. So you can already present yourself, your name, your country, and the organization. And thank you for doing it already this morning. It was great to see many of you from many different countries. So we'll try to launch a poll first to just understand kind of who's attending. So I'll let Liz initiate that, yeah. Just to get a feel for who's in the room.
So the poll has been
virtual
launched,
room.
and the votes are coming in. And we have,
Hello, Martin from Germany. Long time no see, great. FSM.
Guten Morgen. So the votes are coming in. Drum roll. Give it a few more, yeah. Okay, a few more votes. But then as the numbers increase and more tune in, we'll never reach the full, but there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, right, here we go. Ready?
Yep.
Hello, Arya. Hello, Malta. Okay, here we go. Who do we have with us today?
Yeah, it's pretty much stable, I would say, like many NGOs, many teachers, and then researchers, policymakers, yeah.
So that helps give us an idea of who's tuning in. Quite a mix. Quite a mix.
Yeah.
So there you go. I'm a little curious. Will you allow me just to launch this?
Aha, what age group?
Okay. Sorry, I'll share this in a second. It's fascinating stuff. Okay. Right. Okay, we've got nearly 80 tuned in, so I'm giving it a second. Okay. A few more.
You prepared a new poll during the evening.
I did. I'm such a discovering this. Okay, here we go.
It's a great tool, though.
Here we go.
All right. Hey, I'm amongst the majority, 36 to 45. Yeah.
Okay.
Very interesting. And 1 under 18. Aren't you supposed to be at school? Just kidding. Wow, that's great. Amazing.
Great. So quite a mix of people, quite a mix of digital citizens, and from the chat we see also quite a mix of countries. So it's wonderful. So welcome everybody. So you might have noticed that to kick off the webinar series, we sent a video message on Monday morning from the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Margrethe Vestager. You can also see this on the website and the social media channels that we have. It's a great message. I recommend you take a look at it. It's quite inspiring, and let me extend a big thank you to the Executive Vice President for her support and tireless work to shape a digital Europe that works for society. It really matters and means a lot to us. Now, before starting, Martin, any practical tips? Some of you know already, but just in case for newcomers.
Yeah. So very quickly, just be sure that you have a stable internet connection, be close to your Wi-Fi router, or plug in your computer to the modem directly. Make sure you have something to hydrate yourself, because an hour and a half, can go by very quickly, and you dehydrate yourself. So make sure you have your water, tea, juice, whatever. If you're already thinking of a question to put out to Karl or June, just make sure that you put it in the Q&A, not in the chat, because otherwise it will get drowned under so many comments that we'll probably forget about your question. So put it in the Q&A. and use the Q&A only for questions. That would be nice. And then if you're on Twitter or Instagram, you can tweet about the breakfast bites. So tag us. It's for Twitter, it's _EU, the handle. And I think with that, we're ready to go.
All set? Great.
Yeah.
Well, listen, the third of our 8 digital citizenship bites is focusing on the European strategy for better internet for children, led by the European Commission and implemented via the Better Internet for Kids program. So for this bite, we're very happy to welcome 2 speakers. We have June Lowery-Kingston from DG CNECT of the European Commission, where she is responsible for accessibility, multilingualism, and internet safety for children, originally from the northeast of England, and speaking to us today from Luxembourg. Welcome, June.
Thank you.
And we also have a second speaker, Karl Hopwood, e-safety consultant from the European Network of Safer Internet Centres, Insafe, and he's also part of the European Schoolnet team. Welcome, Karl.
Hi, nice to be here.
So, briefly, I mean, building a safer internet for children for us is, well, arguably not only about protecting child rights online, but also about empowering them to be the digital citizens of tomorrow, right? So we were very keen to hear more about the European Commission's work and Vic's work in relation to this overall topic of digital citizenship. So we're very happy to have you here today. Before starting the presentations, I think we can ask 2 questions, right? Mm-hmm. Shall we? Okay, everybody, here we go. The first poll. Now, voila. Have you heard of Safer Internet Day? Ooh.
Good students in the room?
Suspense, suspense.
There's no right or wrong answer, just be honest.
Be honest. Coming in, because we have just under 90 people tuning in right now, so I'll just give you a few more seconds. Okay, votes coming in. Okay, here we go. What do you think, Karl and June?
That looks good to me.
Very impressive.
and by the end it'll be 100%, so it's
absolutely,
all good.
It's for sure.
Then we have a second question before we get started. Who started Safer Internet Day? That's a trickier one.
Is it?
The votes are coming in. I actually don't know the answer to this question.
I think you do, kind of.
You'll find out at the end.
I think I do, but it's a tricky one. Okay, couple more seconds. Okay, there we go. Mm-hmm.
Wisdom of the crowd.
Yeah, but different opinions there. Okay, different levels of knowledge. Okay, great.
So June will give us the answer.
I will at the end. You have to keep listening.
At the end. Suspense. Yeah.
Right. So after that interesting first kind of testing of the temperature out there, I'm going to share my screen so that we can have June's presentation. Here we go.
You're at the end of the slideshow.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Shall we start with the start?
Yeah, that'd be better.
Voila.
There we go.
Start at the beginning. Okay, here we go. June, the floor is yours.
Okay, the floor is mine. Now I just have to find my own PowerPoint. Thank you very much and find out where I am.
It would help.
Yes, it would. But thank you very much for to Co-Host Families Europe for inviting me to be part of this Breakfast Bite series. There are lots of different strands of work by the European Commission linked to keeping children safe online and also empowered online. So the way we're going to split this morning is I'm going to talk about the general commission framework and then hand over to Karl, who I'm delighted to share this morning's session with. And Karl is going to talk more about the concrete actions for safer internet and digital citizenship that are carried out by the network of safer internet centres. And the Safer Internet Centres, some of whom I'm delighted to see with us here this morning, they're not just our eyes and ears from Luxembourg across Europe, but they are our hands and feet. And thanks to them, we can reach millions of Europeans each year with really practical help and answers for internet questions. And that has never been more important than now, when school has been closed, I think worldwide, for an estimated 1.5 billion children due to the COVID-19 crisis. So if we move to the next slide, I like to take a moment just to think about the amazing and the positive changes that the internet and digital technology have brought to us all, but especially to our young people. So love them or loathe them. For example, Justin Bieber discovered at 13 on YouTube. We have Greta Thunberg, of course, who's gone within a year, you know, from being a one-woman strike in Sweden to mobilizing millions of young people worldwide and really shaping politics and EU priorities, as we'll see in a few moments. And I also want to do a little shout out for the Dutch and Indonesian sisters, Isabella Melati Wiesten and Bali, who just aged 10 and 12 started a movement that ended up changing the law in Indonesia and really outlawing plastic bags, single-use plastic bags. So thanks to this digital technology, especially for our young people, these old barriers of location, where you lived, where you grew up, how wealthy your family was, your age to be taken seriously and to be able to contact people, these things almost don't matter online. So there are huge opportunities for our young people. And that's something that we really, it's very important to us in the European Commission, that we raise our children to be confident digital citizens. But there are challenges linked to that, clearly. So if we move to the next slide, we see that this is a slide presented by, made by our Austrian Safer Internet Centre, for whom many thanks. Now, as we saw, I'm sure most of you know from the poll that we did at the start, children are using digital technology earlier than ever, more frequently, for longer, and on more powerful, more portable, and more connected devices than ever before. But also, so are their parents. So if you look in the top left-hand screen, and I'm not sure if this is the case for Martin or not, we have nearly a third of parents took part in this poll who already shared pictures of their children before birth. So this generation is growing up in an unprecedented digital spotlight that's following them even from before they touch foot on the planet. And this trend is probably only set to continue, both in terms of technology changes. What can we expect from the future? Will we move more material, moving to a video or augmented reality, virtual reality technology? What will be the impact of moving to speech technologies already as we see digital assistants coming online? However, I think at the moment, it's fair to say that in the last 8 weeks, we have all made a digital leap, this leap online due to the COVID crisis. And we see, like today, opportunities with that, where we can connect with colleagues and interested parties from Ukraine to Malta to Finland, really worldwide. But what will the long-term impact of that be? We don't know. We just know that the new normal will probably not be what the old normal was like in February. So there is lots being reshaped at the moment. There is lots of uncertainty. But the good news is, at least for the areas that we're talking about today, that thanks to the EU and under the European Commission that took office last November, these issues in terms of child access to technology and safer internet strategy, this was already being taken seriously. So I'd like to show you the face of the European Commission, or the faces of the European Commission. So this is the College of Commissioners that took office last November under President Ursula von der Leyen. Now, President von der Leyen assigns portfolios, and she also gives specific responsibilities and tasks to the commissioners in what are called mission letters. And for the 10 cases that we're circling here for you, 4 vice presidents and 6 commissioners, there are explicit responsibilities or tasks that concern digital rights or digital skills that either implicitly or explicitly concern young people. And I think this clearly illustrates the personal and the political commitment of the President and the College as a whole to these issues. So if you want more detail, you can drill down through the link that I've provided there, which leads you to the college, and you can look to the individual mission letters. I also can only echo what Liz said at the beginning, that we're delighted with the video from Vice President Vestager, who really sets the scene for this and shows also through her personal commitment how seriously she takes these issues. But I'd just like to highlight two commissioners that I've starred, just to highlight them and show you where they are on that chart, not from any other reason of precedence. One is my commissioner, Thierry Breton, who has been specifically asked to contribute to an updated digital education action plan to equip young people and adults with the skills they need for life and work in the digital age. So very much looking at what leads us to be skilled and competent digital citizens. And DG CNECT also has the lead on the Digital Services Act. And Vice President Dubravka Šuica has a responsibility for a comprehensive strategy on the rights of the child. And since that's in the title of today's Breakfast Byte, I thought we should certainly mention that. And her mission letter asks her to prepare a comprehensive EU strategy on the rights of the child, including the protection of vulnerable children, the protection of children's rights online, to support child-friendly justice, and to embed this strategy in the UN Convention for the Rights of the Child, and to lead the EU's work in this multilateral context. And then we see with the other commissioners, we have topics like digital literacy, disinformation, digital skills specifically. So there's a wide range of topics there, but clearly highlighted from the very first moment that the commissioners were appointed. And so these individual responsibilities are also reflected in the political guidelines that the Commission has set itself for the next 5 years. So really all the Commission's work for the next 5 years has to fall into one of these 6 priority areas. And for example, the fact that the European Green Deal, taking climate change and the greening of the economy is so seriously, was that influenced by Greta? I can't know, and I'm unlikely to get the chance to ask our president in person, but it really shows that the Commission is taking that political issue very, very seriously. And then the 4 on the right side, the middle and the right of the screen, with the Europe Fit for a Digital Age, an economy that works for people, promoting our European way of life, and this push for European democracy, all do concern safer internet and digital citizenship in one form or other. And in fact, we can see the links between those 6 real headline ambitions, the top priorities, already broken down into the work programme for this year, for 2020, where the Commission has already committed itself to specific actions. So if we look at the next slide, we'll see these are just a handful of extracts from the Commission's work programme, which is really the top level public commitment by the Commission to what actions are going to happen this year. So you can see that these aren't just fine words. The Commission is really taking this seriously. It's setting itself really key deliverables for this year. And within these 4 topics that I've highlighted, we have, as mentioned also in the video by Vice President Vestager, the importance of data and ethical AI as that shapes our digital economy. The Digital Education Action Plan really speaks for itself in the name. Under the consumer agenda, we're looking at things like digital transactions being safe and trustworthy, and also disinformation. And these are just a few of the concrete and public commitments by the Commission, and more are to follow in the coming years. So for example, work we know has already started on the strategy of the rights of the child, and the public consultation on that, we hope, will be launched before the summer. So I think this is a really clear sign that the Commission is taking these issues very seriously. But we live in interesting times in more ways than one. So if we move to the next slide, not only do we have a Commission that is actually very new in office, we also have within a cycle, we have a 5-year cycle for the Commission, but we also have normally a 7-year cycle for the big budget framework, which is really the big envelope decided with the member states and the co-legislator on what the spending limits are for the next 7 years and what the priorities are for those next 7 years. And so we're at an interesting time in this institutional cycle, if you're an EU geek or interested in these esoteric things. But this matters in practice because really what's decided, and originally we'd hoped that we would have the decision on the envelope of the multi-annual financial framework already now. We don't. And now, obviously, this whole plan is being retweaked to take care, to address also the recovery from COVID-19. But within the spending programs that are already going to form part of this multi-annual financial framework, we have for the first time ever an explicitly digital program. So the Digital Europe program is where we hope that where we expect to have funding for the work that Karl and I are both going to talk about a little bit more from 2021 onwards. And ultimately, this is really what the member states are prepared to pay in and to authorize the Commission to receive in terms of its own revenue. And it really sets what the Commission can spend. So if you want more money being spent on these issues, then this is the lobbying time to really, the priorities that were laid out are now being retweaked. So this also is not yet set in stone. So as I say, interesting times in Norway at the moment. So that's the real macro framework that we work in. If we look at the next slide, this shows the specific Better Internet for Kids strategy that was adopted in 2012, but is still surprisingly relevant, you might think, given that we live and work in such a fast-moving environment and technological developments are happening all the time. Now, the strategy that was adopted in 2012 was really based around 4 pillars, which you see here. The 2 on the left, if you can see the scales of justice in the middle, really look at empowering children, really developing their digital prowess and their skills and their confidence. And the 2 on the right of the screen are more about protecting children in different ways, given that they are a special group who need special attention. And the plan defined actions for the member states, for industry, but also for us around in the Commission, based around these 4 pillars. And as technology and usage has evolved, so really has our thinking and our approach to, I think probably 20 years ago when we first started actions, we were really focused on protection of children. But now I think the approach is much more that we want to help the children to grow up to be confident and competent digital citizens with the skills, but above all the trust that they need to benefit from the online opportunities that are going to be key to the economic future from them. So in last year or so, we've started an informal stock taking with our main contacts, so the member states, industry, our civil society partners in the Safer Internet Network. And what's been, I think, very reassuring for us is that this informal stock taking showed that really the strategy has well stood the test of time, despite the technological changes. But clearly there have been some changes and some gaps identified. For example, here you don't see any references to children's health. And I think while more research is needed on that, that's probably something that we would address more if we were to write the strategy now. But we don't feel that we're in a rush to update it, but that we can look at this in the context of the more comprehensive strategy on the rights of the child that is being developed, where then we know that there will be a section on digital rights as well. So that's the theoretical framework. In terms of what actions we do, if we move to the next slide, what are we doing now? And really, we have a whole host of different types of actions really around these 4 different strands. So we have the strategy, which we've just looked at. We have regulation and laws, where you have a specific mention of the needs of minors. Now that can be either in a directive, for example, on the child sexual abuse material, which was the 4th pillar of the strategy, where clearly we're looking at protection and measures in a very specific and very dreadful crime that really targets children. But also we can look at specific articles within, for example, the updated Audiovisual Media Services Directive, or the articles in the General Data Protection Regulation that specifically address needs or obligations concerning minors. And that also applies for commercial practice, for advertising, for example, and in the new Digital Services Act as well. We also have funding, where we fund the activities that Karl is also going to talk about more in detail. So broadly speaking, we fund coordination and our big portal, plus we co-fund the work of our Safer Internet centres that are in the member states, but also Iceland and Norway. And then we also talk and we listen. And I hope we listen more than we talk. So we cooperate with the member states through an expert group. So we have a formal way to exchange best practice and to brief each other on what's happening in the member states and what's happening at Commission level. And through the Alliance to Better Protect Minors Online, we also meet regularly with industry and with members of civil society, including COFAS Europe. And that is a very, very enriching way that we can talk and learn about what's going on. So if we look at the next screen, I'll show that's the same really, given highlighting our actions in a slightly different way. So we have the coordination there again, and through the coordination we have international events, we have campaigns like the Safer Internet for EU that reached over 60 million citizens in the last 2 years only, and lots of resources. And through our Safer Internet centres, we really have, I would say, 4 great strands of work. So the helplines, which is something I really want to draw your attention to. We have their wonderful awareness raising work, which I know Karl is going to talk about as well, where they're preparing materials to both empower, as we saw on the left-hand side of the strategy, but also protect, as was on the 3rd pillar of the strategy, which I glossed over a bit. But that's really looking at materials to explain how you can access safety tools, parental controls, to understand those for parents, and to really raise awareness of opportunities and risks, not just for children, but also for parents and for teachers, for everyone who works with children as well, to support them. The hotlines address the specific issue of child sexual abuse material online and really contribute to having a quicker takedown of that illegal content. And also a shout out to our youth ambassadors, because this is a really important strand of work and we could not do this without our Safer Internet centres and our BIC platform. So I'm delighted that we have Frida, for example, with us as a BIC ambassador. And as we move to the next slide, we can see the fact that we really need youth participation. So last year, there were over 670 events organised at national or European level with really active youth participation. We have pictures here from Safer Internet Day, where the youth ambassadors really made this pledge to youth and called on industry in a very concrete way to come up with age-appropriate terms and conditions, explanations of data protection and what the companies do with the data that's provided. And this has been part of the EU strategy really from the start. And it's very, very important to us to have this active youth input. We should not be talking at young people, we have to be talking with young people. Because as I said in that very early slide, no generation has faced the same challenges as this current generation, starting with the digital footprint from before birth, where really their every move, their every important event is likely to be shared online. The challenges of having parents who do not always share with care and think through the impact of material they are making available online. And although in the EU we are very fortunate and we have a right to be forgotten, that's still not easy. The internet doesn't forget easily, if at all. And we know that, for example, for college applications, that when there are decisions to be taken between similar candidates, then universities are looking at the digital profile of candidates. So this generation is faced with their digital rec board, their digital rucksack, in a way that none of us than the older generation have ever had to deal with. And so it's very important that thanks to our BIC ambassadors, we get real policy insight. And we also have with them a great tool for peer-to-peer information and sharing, because that information that they share is much more credible as they deal with their peers. So a real call out for the final breakfast bite on the 20th of May with the BIC Youth Ambassadors. I'm sure COFACE have saved the best one to last. And I can only say personally that all the events I've been at, whether it was the Safer Internet Forum or Safer Internet Day, where the youth ambassadors have been involved and have led the sessions, they have been inspiring and impressive. And I'm sure we're in for a treat on the 20th of May. So as I hand over to Karl, with my last slide, I just want to give you the answer, which you probably suspected and which most of you did get right, that the EU was behind the Safer Internet Day initiative, which started out as 6 countries, I think, celebrated this year in over 170 worldwide. So it's a great EU success story, even if it's not always so widely known that it started as an EU initiative. And this is also probably the slide that I want you to remember most, apart from the talk on the 20th of May, because this is really where we recommend you start. It's a great resource. We have information here, as you can see, on specifically dealing with COVID-19, but also day in, day out, in crisis and not in crisis. This is where we bring together the wealth of knowledge from the network of Safer Internet centres across Europe. We have the helplines where you, whoever you are in Europe, you can phone and ask your question. Nothing is too trivial, nothing is too, seemed unsurmountable, especially for young people. If you're a parent wanting to know what technology to use, when's the right time to give a phone, you are not the first to ask the question, and the helplines really can help you in your national language. And for young people especially, it can be a very easy way to access help in a very objective way without the emotional tension sometimes that comes from talking to your family. So we're delighted that we co-fund this work, and we're very proud of that, and really proud of the wealth of information that's available there on the betterinternetforkids.eu platform. So I think that's all from me. I look forward to the questions, and I'm delighted to hand over to Karl now.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Toon. That was very informative. And as a parent myself, I can definitely relate to some of what you've put in that presentation. Sharing with care, digital footprints of my children. Lots to think about. I wonder, well, since you all had the link to the Better Internet for Kids, while Karl is talking, you can go in there and explore it maybe as well while he's talking. Karl, tell us more.
Thank you very much, Liz, and thanks very much, June. It's really nice to be here. So good morning, everybody. Thanks for tuning into this, and thanks to COFACE for inviting us. As June said, and she sort of set me up perfectly for this, we're really proud of the Better Internet for Kids portal and the Insafe Network. And the Insafe Network is basically a network of the 30 safer internet centres around Europe that June's already referred to. And they're made up of 4 sort of main constituent parts, really. The awareness centres, again, have already been mentioned, and they just do a huge amount of work. So, if you don't do anything else, please do go and look at the portal, and I'll be sort of sharing that address again towards the end. They're working regularly in schools, they're working with parents, with teachers, with social care providers, that they're working with church and voluntary groups. And then, we have the helplines, and I'm going to talk in a lot more detail about the helplines as we go through the next sort of 15-20 minutes and try and give you a bit of a flavour of some of the work that they're doing, which is always important, but as June's mentioned, particularly important in the sort of light of COVID-19. We have the hotlines, and we work very closely with them. Many of you will be familiar with the InHope network, which is the sort of overarching body that look after the hotlines. And as June said, that they're dealing with the sort of child sexual abuse material. There's a lot of overlap actually between the work that the helplines do and that the hotlines do as well. There are what we call grey areas, and so that good collaboration is really important. The youth coordinators, every Safer Internet Centre has a youth panel. And they are hugely important. Young people are going to take an awful lot more notice of other young people rather than some old bald guy like me standing up in front of them, spouting off. So I think it's really important that we listen to them. And there have been some amazing stories over the years where colleagues in Safer Internet Centres have said, look, we came up with this amazing resource and we shared it with our youth panel to see what they thought. And we've had to recreate the resource completely from scratch because they told us that it really wasn't going to do what we hoped it was going to do. And so I think that sort of involvement is so important. Worth just saying that there are different types of helpline. So there are 18 general helplines. For example, I think on the in the meeting today, we've got the German helpline Nummer Gegenkummer, who deal with all sorts of issues that children and young people could face, not just online, although of course that they're experts in that as well. And we have 12 helplines which are just dealing with the online safety aspects. And most of them do sort of cater for children and young people, but not all. So one of the helplines deals specifically with adults, with professionals who are working with children and young people. Again, the helpline in the Netherlands, that is for children and young people, but children and young people who've sort of experienced sexual exploitation, sexual harassment, and so on. And amazingly, despite the fact that most of our colleagues are having to sort of work from home at the moment, several of the helplines have actually managed to expand their offering. That they recognise that they're needed more than ever in the current situation, and so they've managed to expand their opening hours as well. One of the things that we do on a sort of 3-month, a quarterly basis, this is done with the helplines and the hotlines actually, is we collect data, because I think one of the really important roles of the helplines, of course, it's to support children and young people and those who get in touch, but actually it's to inform the awareness raising parts of the Safer Internet Centres. So helplines are able to sort of serve as an early warning system, I guess, for us to be able to highlight possible trends. I think we always have to be a little bit careful about that. Just because we see a spike in one or two particular countries about a particular issue, it doesn't mean that we're suddenly going to see it across Europe, that there could be other reasons for that. But we collect data, and this data is available to anybody. It's updated regularly. I've just updated the latest figures that you can see on the screen here. So through the Better Internet for Kids portal, you can access this. But on the screen, who's actually contacting the helplines, and the biggest group is always that 12 to 18-year-old group. Since we started collecting the data, it has been teens, and I guess that makes sense. I think they're sort of using technology for all sorts of different things. Therefore, the more use, potentially, the more challenges that they will face. And it's great that they are reaching out. Worth just saying, clearly, probably only 1 month of this quarter was impacted by COVID, maybe a couple of weeks more in other certain countries. But a 5% rise in the number of teens, and also a 2% rise in the number of parents who are actually getting in touch as well. In terms of how the helplines were contacted, I mean, they offer a whole variety of different ways. And one of the things that people often find quite interesting is that despite the fact we are all connected in a digital world now, contacting helplines by phone has always been way above all of the other means of getting in touch. Interestingly, that figure of 37% is quite a significant reduction on the previous quarter, and I'll talk a little bit about perhaps why that might be. But you'll also see there online forms, email, chat. Of course, helplines are recognising that young people will often be connected to some sort of mobile device, and actually that can be a way to contact. The other block, a whole different raft of ways that people can get in touch, but apps, you know, are often used now because there's something that young people are very familiar with. It provides a private way, perhaps, to be able to have some of those sensitive and difficult conversations. So I just thought it might be slightly helpful to look at the difference between the last quarter of 2019 and the first quarter of 2020. And there you can see, you know, we've gone from over 50% of contacts being made by phone to, I think it was 37%. And, you know, from discussions that we've had with our helpline colleagues, I think, you know, children and young people are in lockdown. We're all in lockdown of various forms. And I think, you know, to be able to find that quiet space, to pick up the phone, to have a conversation that could be overheard by somebody else, that suddenly becomes really difficult. And so I think it's great that we are seeing a slight rise in the number of young people who are using the online means to be able to sort of get in touch and get the help and support and guidance that they need. I think there is a general feel amongst helplines that, you know, once the lockdown is lifted, once young people can perhaps get out and make those phone calls from a private space, that there is likely to be an increase, but that is something we have to wait and see. So in terms of why are people contacting the helplines, this data has remained remarkably stable actually over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. And sadly, you can see at the top there that the number one reason, and it's always been the number one reason, is cyberbullying. You know, and I guess it's important to think about how you define cyberbullying. A commonly sort of accepted definition is that it would be a deliberate and repeated action. And I understand that, I understand why we say that, but I think what we have to recognise is that we have an awful lot of helpline staff, counsellors, psychologists who are inputting the data. And I know from conversations that we've had that some colleagues in helplines will talk about unintentional cyberbullying. And I'm sure you'll all know exactly what this means when I sort of quickly explain. Somebody will say something online and they've genuinely done it because they think it's funny, that there's no malice intended, they're not trying to upset anybody. And I think if they said the same thing to us face to face, which is actually quite difficult at the moment, but if they did, with the benefits of facial expressions and body language and context and tone of voice, everybody's on the same page, everybody gets the joke, you know, nobody misinterprets anything. But I think we all accept that when you're online and you say something, it can very easily be misinterpreted. All of those visual cues and clues have gone. And so, you know, sometimes young people can be incredibly distressed and upset by things that I think perhaps weren't meant that way, but without the facial expressions and that sort of contact, it becomes very difficult to interpret. So sadly, it's you know, far and away, you know, the sort of greatest reason that people will contact. You can see some of the other ones there, and I just wanted to particularly highlight these 5 areas. Love relationships and sexuality online, it obviously encompasses quite a wide variety of different types of concern, but it's always been up there in the top 3, kind of fluctuates between the second and third place really. And sexting and sextortion. I mean, sextortion was something that we didn't even collect data on about 3 years ago. We changed the category slightly through discussion with the helplines at the beginning of 2018. And the majority of helplines said we need to have a new category for sextortion because we're seeing so many calls coming in from young people who have been coerced into sharing images, blackmailed, and so on and so forth. And sadly, since we included this, it's been sort of between 3 and 5% of all calls. So it's something I'll come back to when we discuss some of the case studies. You can also see there sexting, sexual harassment, grooming, you know, so around a quarter of calls are dealing with the sort of sexual relationships type aspect of children and young people's lives, which I guess when we look at some of the other research, it isn't a huge shock. Young people are sort of, you know, exploring their sexuality, they're exploring relationships and so on. And it's great that the helplines are able to provide this sort of support to them.
Karl?
In terms,
Karl?
yeah, sorry, yeah.
No, not at all. We have just one specific question on the gaming. What do people ask about gaming?
Yeah, so thanks, Liz. I hadn't spotted that. Yeah, again, gaming was a new category that we brought in at the beginning of 2018. And I think what that was supposed to cover was, I guess, unpleasant activity that might happen within games. So perhaps some of the sort of bullying stuff that could happen within a game. But also there were quite a lot of calls from parents and teachers about the kind of content that young people were being exposed to within games. And the other one that's come up, I would have said, more in the last 12 months or so, have been concerns, I guess, perhaps you'd call it about commercial concerns. So, children being able to spend money, using virtual currency or real currency. Things like loot boxes, for example, have come up quite a bit in the last couple of reports that we've had. And so that's been categorized under gaming as well.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, no problem. And I think it's always interesting because the awareness centres will be very keen to point out that when they're in schools that, gaming can be a really positive thing as well. I think, one of the things that we say constantly is this isn't so much about the technology, it's more about behaviour. It's about the way we're using these things.
That was one of the conclusions of yesterday. Yeah, thanks.
That's good. Good, we're on the same page. Yeah, so just quickly, in terms of the sort of responses that helplines give, they will provide counselling support. They're very keen, to refer to other services. They're not suggesting that they're experts in everything where necessary. They will signpost to other services within a country or an area, and they have massively good relationships with them. One of the things that helplines have become experts in is helping young people to take control of an account that they might have on a social networking site and helping them to report and remove content. We have, as Safer Internet Centres, really, really good relationships with the key players, with Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube, Google, and lots of others. I think the things that you can do to make an account safer are really quite good now. The controls are really granular. But actually, if you're a regular individual who just uses it and then something suddenly goes wrong, you can't be an expert in the community guidelines on Facebook. Some people can, but then they wouldn't sort of do anything else because they wouldn't have time. And so I think the helplines are able to provide that guidance and support. Sometimes, it will be saying, you do need to go and try and talk to your parents about this. You perhaps need to go and speak to law enforcement officers. One of the things that I did want to just flag is the peer counselling services that quite a few of the helplines offer now. This is young people providing advice, guidance and support to other young people, which is so popular and so empowering. And I think it's something that we're going to see increasing as we move forward. Ultimately, I think what we're trying to do here is sort of giving young people, and indeed anybody who contacts, the skills and the tools to sort of manage this themselves moving forward, to build up that resilience. We often talk about digital resilience, and I think this is a part of that. If we get to some of the sort of specifics around the situation we find ourselves in with COVID-19, the calls for quite a few of our colleagues in the helplines have more than doubled, certainly in March, and obviously it'll be a few months down the line before we get sort of data for this next quarter. You can see there, I won't go through the list, but you can see what the calls are about, and I think we've seen a lot of this in the media in pretty much countries across the world. Interesting, just on the sexting thing there, there's been a rise in calls about sexting. Interesting to hear from some colleagues in the helplines that young people are actually saying, look, I'm separated from my partner, they're in their house, I'm in my house, we've decided we're going to do the sexting thing, can you give me some tips on how to do it safely? So that's a slightly sort of different perspective that helplines have had to deal with. And the one at the bottom of the bullets there, the increased viewing of pornographic content, that's been quite well documented. And of course, there are links that have been made, certainly in the media here in the UK, to the viewing of that sort of content, leading to people looking at more and more extreme content and ultimately child sexual abuse content. A couple of very sort of practical things that colleagues have noticed. Chats are taking longer, so the issues that people are calling with are sort of more detailed. I think that they need more support, they need more reassurance. Quite often people are coming back a second and a third time, which doesn't tend to happen that often. And some of the issues that young people are calling with happened historically, that happened quite a while ago. And colleagues in helplines have said perhaps that's because they've got a bit more time on their hands now. They're not at school all the time. They're not being distracted by other things. They can't go out and play sport and so on. And the last bullet point on the slide, I think it is really important that we do spend a bit more time working with industry and recognizing that they're working from home like many of us are. Some of the moderation, the teams are down by 50%. So, if they're using technical moderation, that's perhaps not always as good. If we are referring things to them, the response times, again, might not be quite as good. That's not an ideal situation for anybody. And I think it's something that everybody is trying to work together to improve. In terms of what the helplines are doing, I mentioned increased opening. Some helplines, like the Icelandic helpline, for example, offering multiple language support now. So, times when, they'll have counsellors who can use different languages to give better support. New hubs, I think the Norwegian helpline, we're opening a couple of new hubs in different parts of the country. Some countries, like the Maltese helpline, that they've actually got a dedicated number just for people who have concerns related to COVID-19. And yeah, as I say, what will happen at the end of lockdown, we expect an increase, a surge in calls, because sadly, we've seen that there's been a rise in domestic abuse and things like that happening within the home. So we expect that this will happen. I think, technology at this point in time, what would we do without it? Well, we wouldn't be having these breakfast bites, for one thing. And you can see on the screen there, it is an absolute lifeline. It's helping us to keep in touch with family and friends who don't live with us. We're learning from home. We are working from home. We're entertaining ourselves with online quizzes and Zoom chats and whatever it might be. The increase in internet traffic has been quite significant. This was some research that Cloudflare brought out just a couple of weeks ago, and you can see, there's only sort of 5 European countries here, but in Portugal, a sort of 50% increase in traffic. So we know that people are online more. That's completely understandable. I think in terms of the screen time concerns, helplines have actually said that's gone down. People aren't as worried about that any longer, perhaps because parents have said, well, yeah, we're just going to have to accept that this is where we are, and there are other things to worry about. In terms of the big challenges that I think COVID-19 has brought around, I just sort of quickly flag up some of the research from Europol that these have come out in the last month. Very readable, short, snappy, but very interesting. And sadly, one of the things that they've highlighted is that people clearly are sort of looking to benefit from the current situation we find ourselves in. So if I go back to the sextortion that we mentioned earlier on, it is clear that offenders are looking, and we've got evidence of this from sort of chats and groups that they're in, sort of dark net conversations and so on, that they're saying to each other, look, lots of young people are online, they can't get out anywhere, they're going to be vulnerable, let's take advantage of this. So, in terms of what can we do, well, it's just reinforcing the classic messages, talking to somebody if you have any concerns, recognizing that there are things that you can do, that you can take control. We've also found that there's been a bit of a resurgence in what I would term old scams. So things that have been around for perhaps 5 or 6 years, which have come back with a bit of a kind of COVID flavor to them. If I give you one very quick example, and this will be familiar to many people, I think, because it's sort of very widespread. You'll get an email, and the email will say, oh, a couple of months ago, we installed some malware onto your device. You didn't know that happened. You clicked on something, and now the malware's there. Since then, we've been videoing you through your webcam, got some very interesting video footage. We've equally got a list of every website that you've ever visited, interesting browsing history. And if you don't pay a certain amount of money, quite often in Bitcoin, it seems to be, then all of this video content, all of the websites, it's all going to be put up online. We're going to send it to your mates, to your family, to your school. You will be massively embarrassed. You need to just pay the money. And, I think most of us would recognize that that's a scam. It's not true. If you were worried, you could stick the old Post-it note or something over your webcam, and then they're not going to see anything. But one of the clever twists that law enforcement colleagues talked about over a year ago now is that somewhere in the email, they would tell you what your password was, and it would be your password, or at least a password that made sense to you, that perhaps you'd used, in the non too distant past. And that was what worked. People were suddenly thinking, crikey, this must be real. What have they videoed? What was I doing? What was I looking at? And they were trying to pay the money. Now, it is a scam. And, just very quickly, without getting into the detail, every day pretty much in the press, you will see the stories where there was a data breach, and it could be from a big social media provider. Just before the lockdown here in the UK, in 1 week, there was a story about the free Wi-Fi that you get in train stations, which lots of us take advantage of. There were stories about supermarket loyalty card schemes where they'd lost data. And basically what happens is the data that is stolen or leaked or breached, it gets put onto the internet onto a thing called a paste bin, and hackers use paste bins. And what they've done is they've created a bot, so a little bit of technology which has gone to the paste bin. It can get the information that it needs to ping out tens of thousands of emails an hour, personalized to you or to me, with the all-important password in. And then the criminals behind it sit back and think, well, we only need a few people to think this is real and try to pay the money, and we're making money by doing absolutely nothing. Now, the COVID-19 sort of twist on that is we've had colleagues in Helpline saying exactly that same thing has happened, but the threat has also been, we know where you live. If you don't pay the money, then we will actually send something to your house, a package that will be infected with coronavirus, which is just crazy stuff. But as you can see from the quote from the 16-year-old boy that's on the screen there, he's saying, well, yeah, I was looking at pornography. That's what people of my age do. And, maybe I was doing something while I was watching the pornography, and maybe they videoed that, I just can't take the risk. So it's preying on those vulnerabilities, and you can understand that. And given some of the things I've already said, more people watching pornography, people stuck inside, you can see how this perhaps is going to be more and more widespread. In terms of some of the case studies, there's a couple here. I'll just put them both up so that you can see them. And sadly, they all take on the same format. And you can imagine, I think June mentioned in her sort of presentation earlier, it's not always easy to tell your parents, especially this sort of thing. Young people will think that nobody's ever done this before. They're the only ones who've made that mistake. And of course, with age and experience, you can say it really isn't the first time that this has happened. But that's still a really difficult conversation to have with anybody. No matter how great your parents are at listening and understanding, are they going to understand that? And we'd like to say, yeah, of course they would. But I think, again, the helplines have a really important role here. The other one, just really quickly, I know we're a bit tight on time, so I'm going to finish shortly.
Great.
Okay, we're good, thank you. Is scams and fake news and hoaxes, and this has again been mentioned earlier on in the sort of session today. So that headline there, that Google are blocking 18 million COVID-19 scam emails every single day. And I think what I wanted to say here is that we all have a role to play, because maybe it's just me, but earlier on in the pandemic, I had to sort of stop scrolling through Twitter and stop looking at my social media feeds, because you were just being bombarded with an awful lot of content. And I think it's very easy to get yourself into a bubble where you're only getting perhaps one side of the story. And I thought I would just give you one example, and apologies because a lot of you may have heard this story before. The Haarlem Aldi hoax was a video that was shared really, really widely. I mean, millions and millions of views on social media. It was on YouTube, it was on TikTok, it was being shared on things like Snapchat and Instagram as well. And the story was, back at the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, you're just finding that shelves in supermarkets are empty, everybody's buying the toilet rolls and whatever else it might be. And this apparently showed the Aldi in Haarlem, and obviously, people panic buying, you can hardly get into the store because of the crowds outside. Now, it actually, first of all, wasn't in the Netherlands. It turned out to be in Germany. and it was nothing to do with COVID-19. The original content first appeared in 2011. Now, Bellingcat did, quite a little bit of investigative journalism around this, and they found all sorts of different things. First of all, in the image, they managed to do a reverse image search on it. They did a still from the video, did a reverse image lookup, and the whole story is there on their page. But it's in Kiel in Germany. They found various different references much earlier. The point being, I think we have to be careful before we share content, otherwise we're contributing to the kind of fake news infodemic that the World Health Organization talked about at the beginning of all of this. And I think we do have to be responsible. I think we have to go and seek out the content that we actually want to find online and be very critical about it. And the other point that I've made there is that, it's interesting sometimes when we talk to children in schools, we'll talk about verified accounts. And I think verified accounts can be important in terms of celebrities and pop stars and things like that. But actually don't just believe something because it comes from a verified account. So, people in very high places have had content removed because it was, being seen to sort of promote a particular cure or something like that. So I think it's just important that, we take stock. We are online an awful lot more at the moment, but let's take a step back and look at what we as individuals can do to try and sort of stem the flow of some of these hoaxes and scams and fake news. So my last two slides, and I will be really brief. June's already spoken about this. Please do go and have a look at the Better Internet for Kids portal. The web address is up there on the screen. There's a huge wealth of information and it's updated on a daily basis. The amount of work that the Safer Internet Centres are doing, not just around COVID-19, but around online issues in general, positive content, empowering young people, is just phenomenal. You can see up at the top there, there's a tab called Online Services. And if you click on Online Services, you'll get information about how to set the privacy controls from Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. There's over 100, I think, different platforms there. You'll equally be able to sort of search for resources in a specific particular language for particular age groups of children and young people as well. In terms of the COVID-19 content, we've worked really hard to try and collate all of that for you. There's a lot of information there for families. There's a lot of information for schools. Schools have had to adapt like everybody else, and they're suddenly sort of doing remote teaching and learning and providing, access using platforms that perhaps people aren't familiar with. We've also tried, again, to look at the sort of scams and the fake news and how you sort of report problems. One of the things that we've also done, and we hope that this is useful, and we couldn't have done this without the help of the Safer Internet Centres, is we've tried to sort of provide a country page highlighting their content, their resources, their information around COVID-19. So I used the Croatian example because, of course, that was where we were supposed to be today. And again, you go into there and there's a whole raft of things that colleagues have done. Materials that parents can use to help to support their children. And I think what a lot of it tries to do is recognize that, as I said earlier, we are online an awful lot more. We can't sort of hide from that. So actually, what a brilliant time to not be sort of frightening everybody about the risks of being online, but promoting the positives and saying, just have a conversation, have that discussion with your children about the things that they need to look out for and what to do if there's a problem. That's enough from me. Let me stop sharing my screen. I hope I didn't take too much time up there, but I hope it sort of gives you a sort of brief overview of some of the amazing work that's being done.
Thanks both. I've been taking notes religiously. I don't know if all of you have as well. It would indeed be amazing to have a big portal of different languages, and I think the opportunities that translation software, automatic translation software offer today, I think, mean that we will go in the right direction, that direction. That would really, boost, I think, the full potential, the use of the BIC portal, which is great on so many levels. Indeed, we will talk to BIC Youth Ambassadors on the 20th of May, so tune in. They are critical thinkers, I can tell you, and they're preparing quite an interesting debate for us. So that definitely is one to flag. I just want to say the big centres, the big Safer Internet centres are great resources, and the family organisations in the CNECT network in some countries partner with them. Because like you said, there are vulnerable youth, but there are vulnerable parents out there, and they don't always know how to deal with this, with the challenges of the digital world. Some of them go to the parental support programs within the CNECT network. Some of them use the Safer Internet, and vice versa. So the parental support programs we have also reach out to teachers and children. I think there's lots of complementarities there. I just wanted to say before taking some of the questions that we're monitoring closely the work of the European Commission, trying, we'd be delighted to feed in to discussions on any future update of the Safer Internet strategy. And clearly digital citizenship, critical thinking are key for us. Yes, children and parents' mental health, keeping an eye out for the impact of VR, virtual reality and augmented reality, online business models, and a number of other things. But, I think it's great to hear that your strategy is still very much, in line with current digital trends, and that you're thinking of maybe a refresh to keep up with the constantly evolving digital ecosystem. So that's my little comments. And, I think Martin might have a few things to say too, but if we just take a couple of the questions. So we have one on Safer Internet, and is it integrated in any way in educational curricula? So that I guess everything you're doing is highly relevant on many levels. So on the children's family environment, but also leisure environment, civic environment, but also educational environment. And I guess the question then is, are there any links between Safer Internet centres or, also on the policy level with the whole education field?
Maybe I'll start and Karl can compliment me if I say something wrong. So for the Commission has a limited mandate as far as education is concerned. So the education curricula, resources, all that is really the member states. So that's what, varies from country to country, and we don't get involved in that. The Commission supports cross-border initiatives and supports, skills and things like that, and obviously fantastic programs like Erasmus. So, however, within that context, that limited role that we have, the Safer Internet centres in some countries are approached by the national government to offer those resources, and clearly they do go into schools. So I can speak for Luxembourg. I know we have Chris Pynchon from Luxembourg with us, but in Luxembourg, for example, within all secondary schools, there is a 2-hour slot that all children get on digital safety, and that is delivered by the centre that is also our Safer Internet centre. But that really varies country to country. So in some countries, the Safer Internet centres provide resources and they do it sort of on request to going into specific schools. And in other countries, the setup might be a bit more formal. I hope that answers the question.
I think so, very much. We have another question. Are there applications to monitor children's work on the computer? If so, what do you recommend?
If I jump in on that, I mean, there are absolutely applications that will allow you to monitor things. I always I think there's a difference between perhaps doing that in a school environment and doing that in a home environment. I always urge a little bit of caution on that sort of thing, because I think that there has to be some transparency, and I think there has to be an element of trust as well. So I think if a parent was going to be doing that, I think, their children need to know that they're doing it, and there needs to be a sort of good rationale as to why.
Dialogue, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it has to be more about the dialogue and the discussion, but there are absolutely, technology is amazing. And, certainly in schools, I've been into schools where the teacher can be sitting with a laptop like this and can see everybody's screen in real time and see what they're doing and so on. So yeah, it absolutely is possible. I couldn't recommend any off the top of my head.
Thank you for that. We also have a question or comment from our COFASE president, Anna Drieskens. Yeah, I guess that's another dimension. I think you cover quite significantly already the role of parents, but definitely taking that two-generation approach is extremely helpful. And we try to use that in our work, and so any future parental support mechanisms, I think, would be quite key. So that's, if I take a look. Okay, why am I not seeing the questions anymore?
Maybe I can.
Yeah, coming.
I see three of them. So the first one is quickly. Yes, the slides will be available. We'll make the slides available on our website. That's one question. And then there was a question for June about what does the European Commission think about the lack of security on Zoom, which was all over the news a few weeks ago, especially since young students are trying to do homeschooling. Yeah, so if you have anything to share about that.
I think this has to be my personal experience rather than anything else. I mean, I certainly recommend, I think Zoom, obviously it's been a bit of a victim of its own success. We saw the figures that Karl shared about internet traffic, and I think of Zoom use has also been exponential increase. And the impression we get is that their security is improving and that they are taking it more seriously. I think, you know, check out the privacy settings first, because I think we seem to be getting fewer reports of classes being Zoom bombed. I mean, there've been horrible stories, you know, synagogue service being hacked by anti-Semitic material, and also a naked man appearing in a Norwegian school setting. I'm not sure, I have not double-checked my sources there, so I don't know if they are true or not, but there are clearly lots of stories and rumours like that. At the Commission, we cannot use Zoom, which is why I'm actually doing this from my private laptop, or we cannot initiate meetings through Zoom. So there are privacy concerns there. But I think if you are, there we go, Karl has given his brilliant summary of Zoom issues. Thank you, Karl. And I think if you set it up right, then you're clearly reducing the risks of having your event hacked or broken into. Karl, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, it was, no, I think you've said it, June, really. I think it is about the privacy settings. I think in a lot of those cases where there's been Zoom bombings and so on, perhaps things could have been set up a little differently, but that resource I've just shared from our colleagues in Austria is really, really good. And it's very balanced and actually talks about some of the things that they've done, that Zoom have done to try and mitigate against some of the challenges as well.
That's great. I mean, clearly, with COVID-19, we'll be using more and more video conferencing software, and there's a lot out there. So I mean, that's probably something to look into in the future. But I think, you know, we'll hear more from our education partners tomorrow, and you know, they're really all plunged into the digital age, whether they like it or not. So the question about video conferencing and which software to use is a relevant one. Which clearly is not going to go away as a question. So thank you for that, and thanks for the answers. We have a question from, I think it's Italy. So, is there any action, or are there going to be any actions to strengthen capacity and skills of social workers and NGOs, organisations in Europe that work with children and youth on using a digital space? Because it's true, you've got teachers, you've got parents, you've got quite a number of organisations that interact with children using digital tools and, you know, in the digital space. So I think it's a fair question. Any plans in relation to support to, you know, people on the front line in relation to social and care work? And that concerns many of COFASE members, actually, to be honest.
I would hope that certainly in terms of this comprehensive strategy of children's rights, I mean, I think there is lots of work going on, for example, in case of migrant children or more specific, more vulnerable groups, that our colleagues also in DG Justice who look at fundamental rights work more actively on that than what I know directly myself. But I would think, you know, that the clue is in the word of comprehensive rights. The strategy on the rights of the child has got to be really sort of far-reaching. So I think there are issues for that, but I think certainly we'll take that into account. And as Karl, you know, I think the images that Karl showed about the helplines, that also there are questions coming in from the social sector as well. So the resource is there for anyone who works with children really to use.
That's the thing. I think the resources are really very useful for all kinds of target audiences, to be honest. So as family organisations, we definitely find them useful. And I believe the partnership with European Schoolnet, eTwinning shows that really it's also a very useful resource for education professionals. And that goes also for non-formal education. So maybe that's an element of answer as well, Alicia, in relation to social workers who are, you know, educators, many of them, support workers.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Liz, I think that it's quite unfortunate sometimes that when resources are created, they are labelled as being for educators in schools. And actually, that's often because of the way that the funding comes through. So I know certainly in the UK, resources, you know, that they're for people in schools, but they apply to anybody. And again, if you went onto the big portal and searched, you'll find handbooks and you know, huge amounts of content, full curriculum in some cases that are for sort of educators, but they do apply across the board, and I think they would be very useful.
Absolutely. I'm looking at a comment in the chat here about the Italian Safer Internet Centre, which is coordinated by the Ministry of Education. And as you said, education is not fundamentally an EU competence, or it might be a shared competence, but it's definitely not an EU competence. But I think the EU can do a lot in terms of leadership, in terms of bringing together, you know, giving some vision, I guess, and bringing together the key. I mean, your description of the portfolios there of the Commission means that this topic is in many fields, and I think that sort of leadership from the EU to at least give a vision and provide tools, like you said, you know, also legislation to protect children and citizens. So I think the EU can do a lot and is doing a lot, and maybe, you know, because I think in education now, as Frida puts it quite well, all teachers are now having to start using, you know, digital tools. So maybe this will come up quite strongly, not only in the future work of DG CNECT, but also in the Rights of the Child strategy, which should be launched spring next year, which we're very much looking forward to. Which will inevitably, I think, look at the rights of children, not only offline, but online. So that's going to be very interesting. So that last question maybe from Frida, do you think all schools over the world should offer these kind of internet computer courses? So training for teachers, you mean, Frida, I think. What's your take on that? Well, Martin as well, you know, all three of you.
I mean, I think I would certainly say personally that I think some sort of online safety education should be part and parcel of initial teacher training. You know, we're living in a world where we are constantly connected and should be. You know, we're training children and young people for life. We're educating them for life, and they're going to be in a job where technology is going to be part of that. So, and I think there is a recognition of that. I think, you know, as June said, it's not compulsory in sort of every school system, but I think, you know, the sort of recognition that it has to be a kind of core skill, and I think sometimes this is moving away perhaps from some of the traditional safety messages, you know, don't talk to strangers, don't give out personal information. I think we can put that to one side, but I think in terms of the impact that tech could have on health and well-being in a positive and a negative way, I think the sort of stuff around self-image and identity, that sort of thing absolutely needs to be part of the curriculum now. And I think the other point I would just make is that for me, online safety, it shouldn't just sit in the lap of the IT department. You know, it needs to be a whole school issue. And I think we are getting there. I think we have made huge steps towards that in recent years.
Whole school, whole society, which is why we're putting digital citizenship firmly on the agenda. I mean, this is really coming up from the grassroots of our organisation. And, you know, digitalisation in schools has always been there in the background as a topic, and lots of debate on, you know, the pros and cons and the grey zones and what's appropriate and not. But now it's firmly on everyone's table. And it's going to be very interesting, I think, to debate all of that. And find a solution that works, indeed, for teachers, for students, for parents alike, because these are very challenging times now with the lockdown. We have a last question. I think we can take a last question from Spain on positive content online.
Yes, and I'm very glad to see that question because it's something that I glossed over. So it is a pillar really of our strategy. If you look on the Better Internet for Kids site, there is a whole section dedicated to positive content. So the resources are there. And it was also part of a campaign that our coordinators, EUN, launched last autumn, where we were talking to industry and trying to really explore that. It's true it hasn't perhaps had such precedence the last couple of years because we were focusing on this Safer Internet for EU campaign, but there are still resources there. It is still something that we take very seriously, and exactly as Karl was saying, to sort of turn that debate to really, thanks Karl, for stopping the for exploring the opportunities and really empowering children, and also giving parents peace of mind to know that those resources are actually going to be reliable. Because although the revamped AVMSD directive will apply as of September this year to video sharing platforms like YouTube, we know that this is like kids' first port of call. It's where they go. It's their Google, is to Google on YouTube, to look on YouTube. And obviously they're your one search away from all sorts of content at the moment. So knowing that there are positive resources there that you can direct your children to, that are entertaining but also stimulating and not just sort of bland and beige type things, is really important. And I think that's a really good resource there.
Great. Martin, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly react on what I've heard so far. So the one big point that I'd like to push forward is that this whole coronavirus crisis has really pushed IT, the digital, and the internet wide into the public interest sphere. So while, before we could say that, internet and these services were private business and, they have to have their kind of autonomy and everything. Now we realize just how important they are for the functioning of society, for the continuation of our work. And I think it like the Zoom, for instance, scandal about Zoom bombings and so forth, it just shows how much, we have to sort of be proactive in terms of the policymakers and so everyone to make sure that the internet is this kind of positive and a good space for everyone. And that kind of public pressure, for instance, on these has pushed these companies to quickly issue patches, new versions of their software where there's more options for privacy and security. And I think that is an encouraging trend that basically we cannot just step back and look at these things and pretend that it's all private and we don't have any leverage, or that there's no public interest dimension. So then there's the whole issue about fake news with the coronavirus, which is blown up in our faces. And I think it's much deeper than just confirmation bias, where you have a certain predefined opinion and then you look for that opinion and you share it. It's also confirmation bias of your emotions. And I think that is where this emotional kind of intelligence of knowing about your emotions, how you feel, is really important, because that's how these new algorithms work, is that they're designed to trigger emotional responses. They know that, for instance, if you think that, for instance, society and people in general are stupid and irresponsible, then you'll be triggered by that Aldi, for instance, video of people queuing and spreading the virus responsibly. And you're like, my God, what country am I living in? People are so stupid. And it's an emotional reaction. It's not only about opinions, which are kind of detached, and scientific and everything. It's really going deep down into our reaching into our feelings, and that is much more insidious because you have much less control over those. And so that prompts for much broader kind of skills, which is to really have that introspection kind of intelligence of knowing where your emotions come from, and trying to master those. And I think practices like yoga, meditation, all these will be also very good and important skills. And then the last point I wanted to push for is to put forward is this whole prevention versus punishment kind of balance, because we saw the cybercrime is increasing massively. And I've asked a question actually to a security specialist at a SEPS conference saying, did you ever do research on the profile of those cybercrime people who are behind all those emails? And he said, well, yeah, actually, we've done that as a kind of a side project. We just contacted these scammers and said, why are you doing this? Why are you sending all these emails? And for many of them, they would they've got actually quite a number of honest responses, surprisingly, saying, look, I'm an IT specialist from a third world country. I'm highly qualified, but there's no job in my country. I feed my family. And so I just use my skills however way I can to make ends meet. So that they're also obviously really bad criminals that don't do this to feed their families, but they're also the other kind of profiles. And so it's a much larger debate about what kind of society we want to live in. When you have a society, an economic system, a financial system, where you have people that are always living in fear of being unemployed, of not being able to make ends meet. You see now the coronavirus is putting pressure on artists, on, God knows what they'll have to invent as a strategy to try to survive. So as a society now, we have the option of investing heavily in prevention, in making sure that everybody is not scared for their lives, for their livelihood, for the livelihood of their families, or one where we focus our investments on punishing people, trying to put, many investigators, putting these people behind bars, censoring and all that stuff. And I'm not saying that it's an either or. We have to do both. Obviously, we cannot let crime go unpunished. But that dimension of making sure that we live in a society where people are not afraid of being left on the side and having to devise really controversial and problematic strategies just to make ends meet, I think that is also a very important point that we should keep in mind. So that
lots in there. Thanks, Martin. Lots to think about. June and Karl, do you want to have a final word before we wrap up?
Just to thank you and to thank everyone for the really interesting questions. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm sorry we haven't been able to get to Croatia, but I feel that we've certainly travelled across Europe today. I think there's one outstanding question, if I can. I don't think I can answer it now, but maybe we can add an answer into one of the slides when we finally give the slides when they're published.
The last one, yes, from Chris. Yeah. Yes, that would be great. That would be great. Thank you very much, June. Karl, any last thoughts?
Yeah, just to say thank you. I've really enjoyed taking part, and having a bit of interaction through the questions is great. And I think my sort of message, I suppose, my takeaway would be that we have to keep talking about this, and clearly the helplines, which is my passion, that they provide an outlet when we haven't got anybody else that we can talk to. But I think it's about listening, and it's about not overreacting, and just sort of being there for each other at the moment.
Listening, absolutely. Thank you very much both for sharing your wisdom today, and to all of you out there for tuning in. Just under 100 people. It's been great interacting with you again. The recording of this Breakfast Bite will be available online, probably end of May, so you can share it, spread it. It'd be great. And please keep the discussions going on social media channels using whatever hashtags you want. We use the Digital Families EU hashtag. And please join us for the next Bytes. Tomorrow we'll be talking to education professionals on e-twinning specifically and how they use technology. And yeah, spread the word, the more the merrier. The registrations are going up and up. So all we can say is a big thank you. Cheers. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers.
Thank you,
Cheers, everybody.
Thanks a lot for attending, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.